I'm Clara, and I'm 28 years old. 3 hours ago, my father's lawyer just told me I need a DNA test to receive my inheritance. My sister Sophia smirked from across the mahogany conference table and said, "Now we have confirmation of who was the real daughter." I kept my face perfectly calm while my stomach dropped to the floor. That's when I realized why Dad always treated me like a stranger in my own home. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I always knew something was off about my place in the Morrison family. My sister Sophia, 5 years younger, got horseback riding lessons while I got a lecture about appreciating what we had. She got a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday. I got a part-time job to save up for a used bicycle. Dad owned a successful accounting firm, so money wasn't the issue. At least, not for Sophia. When she wanted to study art in Paris for a semester, Dad called it following her dreams. When I mentioned wanting to study engineering at Northwestern, he called it unrealistic expectations. My mother, Eliza, was Dad's second wife, 15 years younger, absolutely stunning, with this way of tilting her head when she spoke that made men forget their own names. She'd married Dad when I was 8, and Sophia came along a year later. Perfect timing, really. Mom never worked unless you count organizing charity galas and tending her prize-winning roses as employment. She had opinions about everything except defending me when Dad made his cutting remarks about my expensive tastes every time I needed school supplies. The pattern was clear. Sophia belonged, I was tolerated, but I learned to navigate it. Keep my head down, work twice as hard, expect nothing. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you stop waiting for fairness. I put myself through community college, then transferred to finish my engineering degree at state school. Graduated with honors while working 3 part-time jobs. Sophia dropped out of art school after 2 semesters to find herself backpacking through Europe on Dad's dime. By 25, I was a project manager at a construction firm. By 27, I'd saved enough for my own apartment. Small victories that apparently annoyed my father more than they should have. "Clara always has to prove she's better than everyone else," he'd say during Sunday dinners, which I'd stopped attending after Sophia's graduation party, where he toasted her bright future, while I sat invisible at the end of the table. 3 weeks ago, Dad had a massive heart attack at his office. I rushed to the hospital. Boo, he was already gone. The funeral was a blur of distant relatives and business associates who kept saying how devoted Sophia was for crying so prettily, while I handled all the practical arrangements. That's how we ended up at Morrison & Associates law firm this morning, sitting in partner Richard Morrison's office. No relation to our family, just an unfortunate coincidence that made this whole situation feel even more surreal. "Your father's will contains some unusual stipulations," Richard had said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He was one of those lawyers who paused dramatically for effect, probably practiced it in law school. The will itself was straightforward enough. Sophia inherited $2 million, plus Dad's vintage car collection. Mom got the house and a comfortable monthly allowance. I got the legally required minimum for biological children, roughly $100,000. But here's where Dad's final power play revealed itself. Sophia would only inherit if she was his biological daughter. I would only inherit if I was his biological daughter. And Mom would only keep the house if both daughters proved to be Dad's legitimate children. If either of us failed the DNA test, the other would inherit everything. If both failed, well, let's just say Dad had backup plans that involved distant cousins and his beloved American Cancer Society. DNA tests for both daughters, Richard continued, to be administered within 30 days. Results will be read aloud in this office with all beneficiaries present. Sophia's reaction was immediate. "This is ridiculous. Of course we're both his daughters." But I caught something in her voice. A tiny tremor that didn't match her confident words. "Clara's the one who should be worried," she continued, shooting me a look that could freeze summer. "We all know Dad never quite trusted her parentage." And there it was. The truth I'd felt but never understood finally crystallized in that sterile conference room. Dad had suspected I wasn't his biological daughter. That's why he'd treated me like a stranger at my own breakfast table for 20 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. If you'd asked me this morning who was more likely to fail a paternity test, I would have said myself without hesitation. After all, I was the one who looked different, acted different, wanted different things than the rest of them. But as I watched Sophia fidget with her designer handbag and avoid eye contact with Mom, an interesting possibility began forming in my mind. What if Dad's instincts were right about everything except the target? The DNA testing facility smelled like antiseptic and broken dreams. Sophia and I sat in adjoining chairs while lab technicians swabbed the inside of our cheeks with the efficiency of people who'd seen every family secret imaginable. "This is so degrading," Sophia whispered, loud enough for the technician to hear. "Like we're criminals or something." I said nothing, just watched the careful labeling process. Sample 1A, Clara Morrison. Sample 1B, Sophia Morrison. Soon enough, we'd know which one of us had been living a lie. The technician, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, seemed to sense the tension. "Results typically take 5 to 7 business days," she said professionally. "The lab will contact your attorney directly. 5 to 7 days to learn whether my entire childhood made sense or if I'd been wrong about everything." That evening, I called my best friend Jessica from college. We'd remained close even though she'd moved to Denver for work. Sometimes you need perspective from someone who knew you before your family convinced you that you were the problem. "Wait," Jessica said after I'd explained the situation. "Your dad made you get a DNA test? That's seriously messed up, Clara." "It gets better. If I'm not his biological daughter, Sophia inherits $2 million. If she's not his daughter, I get everything." Silence on the other end of the line. "Jessica? I'm here. I'm just remembering something from your graduation party." "What graduation party? You mean Sophia's?" "No, yours. Community college graduation. I drove down to surprise you, remember? You said your family couldn't make it because of some emergency." I did remember. I'd walked across that stage alone, collected my diploma, and driven myself home to an empty apartment. Mom claimed Sophia had food poisoning, though I later saw Instagram photos of them at a spa that same afternoon. "What did you remember?" I asked. "Your mom was there, Clara, in the parking lot. I saw her sitting in her car, watching through the window. She saw you graduate, but she never came inside." My stomach tightened. "You never told me that. I thought maybe you knew. Maybe it was some weird family thing." But the look on her face... Jessica paused. She wasn't proud or sad. She looked guilty, like she was watching something she had no right to see. After hanging up, I couldn't shake the image of Mom sitting in her Mercedes, watching me achieve something she'd never acknowledged. Why come at all if she wasn't planning to celebrate with me? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was getting ready for work when someone knocked on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw Sophia's perfectly styled blonde hair. "We need to talk," she said when I opened the door, pushing past me without invitation. She looked around my modest living room with the same expression she might wear while touring a homeless shelter. "Nice place," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Very practical." "What do you want, Sophia?" She sat on my secondhand sofa, careful not to wrinkle her designer dress. "I want to make a deal." I remained standing, arms crossed. "What kind of deal?" "When these test results come back and we both pass, I'll give you an extra 100,000. Cash." The offer hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. "Why would you do that?" "Because," Sophia said, suddenly looking younger than her 23 years, "I know what it's like to wonder if you really belong somewhere." It was the first vulnerable thing I'd heard her say in years. But vulnerability from Sophia usually came with strings attached. "And what do you want in return?" Her mask slipped back into place. "I want you to promise that no matter what these results say, you won't contest Dad's will. You'll take whatever you're entitled to and walk away quietly." There it was. The real reason for her visit. "You're scared," I realized aloud. "You're genuinely worried about what these tests might show." Sophia stood abruptly, smoothing down her dress. "I'm being practical. Family drama is so exhausting, don't you think?" But I'd caught something in her expression when I mentioned fear. A flash of panic that confirmed my growing suspicion. "I'll think about your offer," I told her. "Don't think too long. The results come back next week." After she left, I sat in my kitchen and really looked at my family dynamics for the first time with clear eyes. Dad's coldness toward me. Mom's guilt. Sophia's desperation to make deals before we even knew what we were dealing with. I'd spent my whole life assuming I was the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit the Morrison family mold. But what if the truth was more complicated than that? What if the person who didn't belong wasn't me at all? 3 days into waiting for results, Mom called. Her voice had that artificial brightness she used when she was about to ask for something uncomfortable. "Clara, sweetheart, could you meet me for lunch? Just the two of us. We should talk." We met at Rosewood Cafe, one of those places where the salads cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. Mom was already seated when I arrived, wearing a cream-colored blazer and the pearls Dad had given her for their 10th anniversary. "You look thin," she said instead of hello. "Are you eating enough?" Classic Mom. Concerned about appearances, indifferent to actual well-being. "I'm fine." What did you want to discuss? She fidgeted with her wedding ring, sliding it up and down her finger in a nervous habit I'd noticed since childhood. This whole DNA situation has me thinking about the past. What about it? I want you to know that regardless of what those tests say, you're my daughter. Biology doesn't change that. It was a nice sentiment, but her delivery felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech in her bathroom mirror. Mom, is there something you want to tell me? Her coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down too quickly. Tell you? No, of course not. I just think your father was being unnecessarily dramatic with all this testing business. Then why agree to it? Because fighting it would have looked suspicious. There was that word again. Suspicious. Everyone seemed worried about appearances, about looking guilty of something. What would you be suspicious of? I pressed. Mom's eyes darted around the cafe like she was checking for surveillance equipment. Nothing specific, just the natural concerns any mother would have about invasive medical procedures. She was lying. Badly. Did Dad ever express doubts about whether Sophia was his daughter? The question hit its target. Mom's face went white, then flushed pink in a way that reminded me of Sophia when she'd been caught in a lie. Clara, that's a terrible thing to suggest. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking a direct question. Mom signaled the waitress for the check, suddenly eager to end our lunch. Your father loved both his daughters equally. That's not what I asked, and we both know it's not true. The silence stretched between us, filled with 20 years of unspoken tensions and carefully avoided truths. Your father, Mom said finally, was a complicated man with strong opinions about family loyalty. What does that mean? It means some questions are better left unasked, Clara. But here's the thing about engineers: we don't leave questions unasked. We dig until we find the structural problems that explain why buildings fall down. That afternoon, I did something I probably should have done years ago. I looked up public records for my parents' marriage and Sophia's birth certificate. Mom and Dad married in June 1998. Sophia was born in February 2000, 20 months later, which seemed reasonable for a couple starting their family. But then I found something interesting. A marriage certificate for Elizabeth Carson, Mom's maiden name, and someone named David Mitchell, dated August 1999. Just 3 months before Sophia's birth, the pieces clicked into place with mathematical precision. Mom had married another man while pregnant with Sophia, then divorced him 6 weeks later to marry Dad. I stared at the computer screen in the public library, finally understanding why Dad had always treated me like I was the suspicious one. He'd been looking in the wrong direction entirely. Sophia wasn't his daughter, but he'd never suspected it because Mom had been so careful to make him doubt me instead. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to meet tonight. It's about the test results. David Mitchell. Have you ever experienced a moment when your entire past suddenly made perfect sense? Drop a comment below about a time when you discovered the truth was completely different than what you'd always believed. David Mitchell looked exactly like Sophia. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same stubborn chin. We met at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the waitresses minded their own business. You must be Clara, he said, standing when I approached his booth. You look like your father. The real one, I mean. I slid into the opposite seat, studying this stranger who apparently held pieces of my family's puzzle. How did you get my number? Public records. Your work phone is listed with the city permits office. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm a private investigator. Finding people is what I do. And what exactly do you do with people once you find them? David pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table between us. Sometimes I give them information they never knew they needed. Inside the folder were photographs, documents, and what looked like investigative reports. The first photo showed Mom and David at what appeared to be a courthouse, both of them young and serious-faced. We were married for 6 weeks, he said. Long enough for Elizabeth to establish paternity for Sophia, then she divorced me and married your father immediately afterward. Why? Money. David's laugh held no humor. I was a rookie cop making $35,000 a year. Your father was a successful accountant with a growing practice and excellent prospects. The timeline was becoming clear. Mom had gotten pregnant by David, married him just long enough to give Sophia a legal father, then traded up to the more financially stable option. But why the DNA test now? If Dad never suspected Sophia, because he did suspect something, just not what he thought. David pulled out a thick report. Your father hired me 6 months ago to investigate your family. My coffee went cold as I read through pages of surveillance reports, financial records, and background checks that painted a picture of systematic deception spanning decades. He wanted to know why you were so different from the rest of the family, David continued. He thought maybe Elizabeth had an affair, that you weren't his biological daughter. But I am. Oh, you absolutely are. Genetic testing confirmed it last month. Wait. I looked up from the reports. Last month? David nodded. Your father had already tested you, Clara. Hair from your hairbrush, apparently. The man was nothing if not thorough. The room seemed to tilt slightly. He knew I was his daughter. He knew you were his daughter, and he knew Sophia was mine. The will wasn't about determining paternity, it was about exposing the truth publicly. I stared at this stranger who'd unknowingly fathered my sister and felt something I'd never experienced before. Vindication. Why tell me this? What do you want? David closed the folder. I want to meet my daughter before she inherits $2 million based on a lie. What makes you think she doesn't already know? Because if she knew, she wouldn't have offered to pay you off to avoid contesting the will. He had a point. Sophia's desperation to make deals made perfect sense if she suspected something but wasn't sure what. The test results come back tomorrow, I said. I know. I'll be there. Mom doesn't know you're alive? David's expression darkened. Elizabeth thinks I died in a car accident 15 years ago. She even sent flowers to the wrong funeral to make sure I stayed buried. The pieces were falling into place with the satisfaction of a perfectly engineered solution. Mom's guilt. Sophia's fear. Dad's coldness toward me covering up his real suspicions. What happens tomorrow when everyone learns the truth? That depends entirely on what kind of person your sister turns out to be. I drove home that night with my entire worldview rearranged. For the first time in my life, I understood why I'd never felt like I belonged in my own family. It wasn't because I was different. It was because I was the only one who was actually supposed to be there. The irony was almost poetic. Dad's final act of controlling his family would expose the truth he'd been too proud to confront while alive. Mom's careful deception would finally crumble under the weight of genetic evidence. And Sophia? Well, she was about to learn that sometimes the DNA you try to avoid testing is the DNA that reveals everything. The next morning brought a call from Richard Morrison's office. The results are in. Can everyone be here at 2 p.m.? I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, which is what I do when I'm nervous. By noon, every surface gleamed and I'd reorganized my entire kitchen pantry. Twice. Jessica called as I was getting dressed. How are you holding up? Honestly, I feel like I'm about to watch a train wreck in slow motion, except I'm not sure if I'm a bystander or standing on the tracks. What's your gut telling you? I thought about David's evidence, Mom's guilt, Sophia's desperation. My gut says today is going to be very educational for everyone involved. Will you call me after? If I'm still speaking to any of my family members, yes. The law office felt different this time. More formal, more final. Mom arrived first, wearing all black like she was attending a funeral. Her hands shook as she signed in with the receptionist. Sophia came in 10 minutes later, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked suspiciously like dread. She sat as far away from Mom as possible and kept checking her phone like she was expecting news from somewhere else. I took a seat facing both of them, curious to see their reactions to whatever Richard was about to reveal. Before we begin, Richard said, settling behind his massive desk, I want to remind everyone that these results are legally binding and will determine the final distribution of assets according to your father's will. Mom shifted in her chair. Can we just get this over with? Richard opened an envelope with the ceremonial gravity of someone announcing Academy Award winners. The DNA tests have confirmed the following. He paused, and I could hear Mom's breathing become shallow. Clara Morrison is definitively the biological daughter of Thomas Morrison, with 99.97% certainty. I felt relief flood through me, followed immediately by anticipation for what came next. Sophia Morrison, Richard paused again, longer this time, is not the biological daughter of Thomas Morrison. In fact, the genetic markers indicate no biological relationship whatsoever. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Sophia's face cycle through confusion, denial, and finally, devastating understanding. That's impossible, she whispered. There must be a mistake. The lab ran the tests twice to confirm accuracy, Richard continued. I'm afraid there's no error. Mom stood abruptly, swaying slightly. This is ridiculous. Tommy was Sophia's father. He was there when she was born. He raised her. Mrs. Morrison, Richard said gently, the DNA evidence is conclusive. I watched this scene unfold with the detached fascination of someone solving a complex equation. Every variable was falling into place exactly as the math had predicted. What does this mean for the inheritance? I asked, though I already knew the answer. According to your father's will, since Clara is his only biological child, she inherits everything. Sophia receives nothing, and Mrs. Morrison forfeits her inheritance as well, due to the betrayal clause your father specifically included. Sophia's perfectly controlled facade finally cracked. This can't be happening. Clara, you have to contest this. You have to share it. I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister who wasn't really my sister. Why would I do that? Because we're family. Are we? Because the DNA says otherwise. Mom stepped forward, her voice rising. Clara, you can't seriously be considering keeping everything. Sophia is still your sister, no matter what some test says. Actually, I said calmly, the law disagrees with you. That's when the conference room door opened and David Mitchell walked in. Sorry I'm late, he said, looking directly at Sophia. Traffic was terrible. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mom's face went from flushed to pale so quickly I thought she might faint. Who is this? Sophia demanded. David smiled that same stubborn smile I'd seen in the mirror countless times on Sophia's face. I'm David Mitchell, your father, your actual biological father. If silence could kill, we'd all have been dead. Mom gripped the back of her chair like she was drowning, and Sophia looked like someone had just explained that gravity was optional. Elizabeth, David said to Mom, his voice carefully neutral. You look good. Marriage to money suits you. Mom couldn't speak. She just stared at this ghost from her past who had walked into her carefully constructed life and blown it apart with genetic evidence. I don't understand, Sophia said, looking between David and Mom. What is this? What's going on? I decided to help explain. After all, I'd had more time to process this particular family drama. David is your biological father. Mom was married to him when you were born, then divorced him to marry Dad immediately afterward. She let Dad believe you were his daughter for 23 years. Sophia sat down heavily. Mom? Is this true? Mom's voice came out as a whisper. Sophia, sweetheart, I can explain everything. Can you? David asked. Because I'd love to hear the explanation for why you told me I could never see my daughter, then let another man claim her as his own. The room felt like a courtroom where everyone was guilty of something, but the verdict was only just being delivered. What do you want? Mom asked David, finally finding her voice. I want to get to know my daughter, he said simply. And I want to make sure she understands that her inheritance from Thomas Morrison was based on a lie. Sophia looked at me with something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Desperation. Clara, please, we can work something out. You don't need all that money. And that's when I realized I was no longer the outsider looking in. I was the one with all the power. What would you do if you suddenly discovered your entire family had been living a lie? Comment below and let me know. The aftermath of truth is messier than you'd expect. We sat in that conference room for another hour while Richard explained the legal implications of Dad's will, and David provided documentation proving his paternity claim. Sophia kept looking between David and me like we were both speaking a foreign language. This doesn't make sense, she kept saying. Dad loved me. He paid for me education, my car, my apartment. Yes, I said quietly. He did, while I paid for my own. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Dad had unknowingly showered his non-biological daughter with affection and financial support while treating his actual daughter like an inconvenience. Mrs. Morrison, Richard said to Mom, you'll need to vacate the family home within 60 days. The property transfers to Clara as part of the estate. Mom's perfect composure finally shattered. Clara, you can't seriously kick me out of my own home. It's not your home, I replied, examining the deed Richard had handed me. According to this, it never was. Dad kept the title in his name exclusively. The truth kept revealing new layers. Dad hadn't trusted Mom enough to put her name on the house, even after 20 years of marriage. Part of him had always suspected something wasn't right. David stood to leave. Sophia, I'd like to take you to dinner sometime if you're interested in getting to know your actual father. Sophia looked at him like he was offering her a live snake. I need time to process this. Take all the time you need. I've waited 23 years. I can wait a little longer. After David left, the three of us remaining women sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Mom spoke. Clara, I know you're angry, but taking everything won't bring your father back or change how he treated you. I stood up, gathering the legal documents that made me a millionaire. You're right. It won't change the past. But it might make the future more interesting. What do you mean? Sophia asked. I looked at my sister, who wasn't my sister. This woman I'd spent my childhood envying and my adulthood avoiding. I mean, I'm going to think very carefully about what kind of person I want to be now that I have choices I never had before. That evening, I sat in my small apartment surrounded by legal documents worth more than I'd ever imagined possessing. My phone had been ringing constantly, Mom, Sophia, even some distant relatives who'd apparently heard about the inheritance through the family gossip network. I turned it off and ran a bath. Jessica called the landline I'd forgotten I still had. Holy hell, Clara! You're rich! Technically, yes. Emotionally, I feel like I've been through a blender. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? For the first time in my adult life, I didn't have to worry about money. Didn't have to calculate whether I could afford groceries and rent in the same week. Didn't have to decline social invitations because they cost more than my carefully budgeted entertainment allowance. I'm going to hire a financial advisor, I said. And maybe take a vacation. That's it. Clara, you just inherited millions of dollars and discovered your entire family structure was built on lies. Don't you want revenge or something dramatic? I thought about that. Did I want revenge? Sophia had lived a life of privilege based on a lie, while I'd struggled for everything I'd achieved. Mom had manipulated and deceived everyone, including her own daughters. They'd both looked at me today like I was the villain for not immediately offering to share money I was legally and morally entitled to. I don't want revenge, I said finally. I want clarity. What does that mean? It means I'm going to take some time to figure out who I am when I'm not the disappointment daughter who never quite measures up. The next morning, I drove to the family home for the first time since Dad's funeral. Mom's Mercedes was in the driveway, along with a red sports car I didn't recognize. I used the key Dad had given me years ago, back when he still hoped I might turn into the daughter he wanted. I found Mom and Sophia in the living room, with a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as a lawyer, specializing in inheritance disputes. Clara, Mom said, standing quickly, we need to talk. I looked around the house where I'd grown up feeling like a stranger. The family photos on the mantel showed 3 generations of Morrisons, with me appearing in maybe half of them, usually standing slightly apart from the others, like even the camera knew I didn't quite belong. What did you want to discuss? I asked. The lawyer cleared his throat. Miss Morrison, my clients would like to propose a settlement that would avoid lengthy and expensive litigation. What kind of settlement? Sophia leaned forward eagerly. We split everything 3 ways. Fair and simple. I almost laughed. Fair? You want me to give you 2/3 of an inheritance you're not legally entitled to? We're family, Mom said. Family takes care of each other. Funny, I replied. I don't remember you applying that philosophy when I was working 3 jobs to pay for college. The lawyer tried again. Miss Morrison, contesting this will could take years. Legal fees alone could consume a significant portion of the estate. And who exactly would be contesting it? The DNA results are clear. The will is straightforward. I'm the only legal heir. I could see them realizing their leverage was non-existent. They had nothing to bargain with except sentiment. And sentiment doesn't hold up in court. What do you want from us? Sophia asked quietly. I studied these 2 women who'd shaped my childhood through their indifference and favoritism. They'd taught me that love was conditional, that approval had to be earned, that my worth was always subject to revision. I want you to understand something, I said. For 28 years, I believed there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to earn the same treatment Sophia received. I blamed myself for Dad's coldness and your neglect. Mom's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. Now I know the truth. There was never anything wrong with me. You were just guilty, and he was suspicious, and Sophia was living a lie. But I was the only one actually trying to earn my place in a family where I already belonged. I walked to the door, then turned back. The house, the money, the investments, they're all mine legally. What I do with them is entirely up to me. And right now, I'm thinking about what kind of person I want to be. Clara, please, Sophia called. I'll let you know what I decide, I said. But here's something you should probably understand. For the first time in my life, the choice is entirely mine. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a financial advisor's office learning about investment portfolios and trust funds when my phone rang. David Mitchell's name appeared on the screen. I thought you should know, he said without preamble. Sophia wants to meet with me tonight. She has questions. What kind of questions? The kind that involve understanding why her mother lied to her about her entire identity for 23 years. I could imagine Sophia's confusion. Everything she'd believed about herself had been revealed as carefully constructed fiction. Her relationship with Dad, her place in the Morrison family, even her legal name were all based on Mom's deception. How are you feeling about becoming a father again after 23 years? I asked. David was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I'm nervous. She's grown up with privileges I could never have provided, but she's also grown up without knowing who she really is. After the call, I drove to Dad's accounting office. The building manager had been waiting for instructions about the business, which was worth considerably more than I'd expected. Walking through Dad's office felt like exploring a museum dedicated to someone I'd never really understood. His desk contained the usual business documents, but also personal items that surprised me. A photo of me at my college graduation that I didn't know he'd attended, a newspaper clipping about a project I'd managed that had won a safety award, and a letter I'd written him when I was 10, thanking him for helping me with a math problem. The letter was worn from handling, like he'd read it many times. I found myself sitting in his chair, trying to understand this man who'd loved me enough to investigate my parentage, but couldn't figure out how to express that love while he was alive. His computer required a password. On impulse, I tried my birth date. It unlocked immediately. His browser history revealed searches for reconciling with adult children and how to apologize for emotional neglect. He'd bookmarked articles about rebuilding family relationships and had drafts of emails to me that he'd never sent. One draft, dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack, read, "Clara, I know I've been a terrible father to you. I let my suspicions about your mother affect my relationship with you, and that was unforgivable. You've grown into an impressive woman despite my failures, not because of my guidance. I hope someday you'll let me try to do better." I stared at that message for a long time, feeling something I hadn't expected. Grief for the relationship we might have had if he'd been brave enough to press send. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Can we meet? Just the two of us. I have something to tell you." We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where neither of us had the advantage of familiarity. Sophia looked different somehow, less polished, more uncertain. "I talked to David last night," she said after we'd ordered. "He told me about Mom's plan to fake his death. How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, furious. She stole 23 years from both of us. He could have been part of my life, and I could have known my real father instead of wondering why I never quite measured up to Dad's expectations of me." This surprised me. "You felt like you didn't measure up? He gave you everything." "He gave me everything, but he never really saw me. I was like an expensive pet he enjoyed spoiling but didn't actually connect with." Sophia stirred her coffee absently. "I always wondered why he seemed more interested in your achievements than mine. Now I understand he was trying to figure out if you belonged to him, while taking it out on me instead of confronting Mom. Clara, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer." "Okay. What would it cost for you to share the inheritance?" I'd been expecting this conversation, but her phrasing caught my attention. "Cost me? What do you mean?" "I mean, what would I have to do to earn it? Not just family sentiment or guilt trips, but actual effort. Work. Change." This wasn't what I'd expected from Sophia. She was approaching this like a negotiation rather than an emotional manipulation. "Why should I consider sharing anything with you?" "Because," she said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time in years, "I'm asking you to invest in the person I could become instead of punishing me for the person I've been." Elaborate. "David told me he's a private investigator. He offered to teach me the business. I've never had a job that required actual skill or effort. I've never had to prove I was worth anything beyond my appearance and charm." She leaned forward. "I want to earn a place in your life, Clara. Not as Dad's favorite daughter, but as someone who actually deserves your respect. And in return? In return, I'd like enough from the inheritance to start fresh. Not the full amount I would have inherited based on the lie, but enough to prove to myself and to you that I can build something real." I studied my sister who wasn't my sister. This woman who'd lived a completely fabricated life and was now asking for the chance to build an authentic one. "How much is enough?" I asked. "Whatever you think someone should have to earn a second chance." It wasn't the answer I'd expected, but it was the first honest conversation Sophia and I had ever had. What do you think will happen next? Will Clara give Sophia a chance to prove herself, or keep everything she's legally entitled to? Drop your predictions in the comments below. I gave myself a week to think about Sophia's proposition. During that time, I discovered a few things about my newfound wealth that put everything into perspective. First, Dad's accounting business was worth $1.2 million and came with 15 employees who depended on it for their livelihoods. Second, the family house needed a new roof, updated electrical systems, and foundation repairs that would cost approximately $60,000. Third, Mom's monthly expenses, based on the credit card statements I found, were roughly $8,000 above what most people considered reasonable for basic living. Jessica drove down from Denver to help me sort through the financial reality of my situation. "Clara," she said, reviewing the spreadsheets I'd created, "you're not just rich, you're responsibly wealthy. There's a difference." "Explain." "Rich people spend money. Wealthy people make money work. And responsibly wealthy people consider the impact of their decisions on other people's lives." She was right. I could keep everything and live comfortably while watching Mom struggle with financial reality for the first time in her adult life. I could maintain Dad's business or sell it and put 15 people out of work. I could let Sophia scramble to figure out adult life without the safety net she'd always known, or I could use this opportunity to create something better than what I'd inherited. That afternoon, I called a meeting with Mom, Sophia, and David at Dad's office. I'd prepared a presentation because that's how engineers solve complex problems, with data, analysis, and clear recommendations. I've spent the past week reviewing Dad's estate and considering everyone's situation, I began, pulling up my laptop presentation. Here's what I've decided. Mom sat rigidly in the conference chair, while Sophia and David flanked her on either side. The family resemblance between father and daughter was unmistakable now that I knew what to look for. First, Mom, you can continue living in the house for 1 year while you figure out your next step. I'll cover the necessary repairs, but you'll need to downsize your lifestyle significantly. The credit cards are canceled, and you'll have a monthly allowance of $2,000. Mom's face flushed. $2,000? Clara, that's barely enough to cover basic expenses. It's exactly enough to cover basic expenses. Food, utilities, transportation, and a modest clothing budget. You'll need to learn to live within your means for the first time in your adult life. I clicked to the next slide. Sophia, here's my offer. I'll provide you with $100,000 as seed money to start working with David. You'll earn additional payments based on demonstrable progress in building a legitimate career. No more than $50,000 per year for the next 3 years, and only if you can prove you're actually working. Sophia nodded slowly. What kind of proof? Tax returns showing earned income, client testimonials, evidence that you're contributing to society instead of just consuming resources. I looked at David. I assume you're willing to actually teach her the investigative business, not just provide her with a title? I've been looking for a partner, he said. Someone smart enough to handle the research side while I do the field work. Good. That brings me to my final decision. I clicked to the last slide. I'm establishing the Morrison Family Foundation. I'll fund it with $2 million from the inheritance. All 3 of them stared at me. The foundation will provide college scholarships for students from families where education isn't financially feasible. Kids like me who have the ability but not the resources. Mom found her voice first. Clara, that's very generous, but what about your own future? I'll be fine with the remaining assets. The house, the business, and Dad's investment portfolio are more than enough for any reasonable person's lifetime. But you're giving away $2 million, Sophia said. I'm investing $2 million in creating opportunities for people who need them. The way no one invested in my opportunities when I was struggling to pay for school. David leaned back in his chair. Your father would be proud of this decision. Maybe, but I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. I closed my laptop and looked around the table at these 3 people who'd shaped my life through their dysfunction. Here's what you all need to understand. I could keep everything and watch you struggle. Part of me wants to, because it would be justice for all the years you made me feel like I didn't deserve basic consideration. But revenge is expensive, and I'd rather invest in building something meaningful. Mom was crying now, though whether from grief or relief I couldn't tell. There are conditions, I continued. Mom, your year in the house is contingent on you getting therapy to address whatever drove you to build your entire adult life on deception. Sophia, your payments stop immediately if you revert to expecting other people to subsidize your lifestyle. And if we don't agree to your conditions, Mom asked, then you get exactly what Dad's will specified. Nothing. The choice is yours. Sophia spoke first. I accept your terms. Mom hesitated longer. Therapy is so public. No, I said. Therapy is private. This conversation, however, could become very public if you force me to defend my decisions in court. I'll do it, she said quietly. David looked around the table. I have to say, Clara, this is probably the most thoughtful approach to family drama I've ever witnessed. I had good motivation to get it right. As we were leaving, Sophia caught my arm. Clara, thank you for giving me a chance to prove I'm more than what I've been. Don't thank me yet, I said. You still have to actually prove it. 6 months later, I was reviewing quarterly reports for the Morrison Family Foundation when Sophia called. You need to see this, she said, excitement clear in her voice. David and I just closed our first major case. We met at a restaurant downtown, and Sophia looked different. Her designer clothes had been replaced with practical business attire, and she carried a laptop bag instead of a purse that cost more than most people's rent. Tell me about the case, I said after we'd ordered. Missing person investigation. A teenager who'd run away from an abusive foster home. The family hired us after the police stopped actively searching. Sophia pulled out a tablet and showed me photos of a young girl, maybe 16, with hollow eyes and defensive posture. We found her working at a truck stop 3 states away, sending money back to a younger sibling still in the system. Instead of just returning her to the foster care system, David helped her file for emancipation and connected her with resources for finishing high school while supporting herself legally. I studied my sister's face as she told the story. She was genuinely proud of the work, not just the outcome. What was your role in the investigation? Research, mostly. I spent weeks tracking her digital footprint, interviewing classmates, mapping possible routes she might have taken. David says I have a natural talent for seeing patterns that other people miss. How does it feel to use your intelligence for something constructive? Sophia smiled, and for the first time in our lives, it reached her eyes. Honestly, like I've been sleepwalking for 23 years and just woke up. What about the financial side? Are you managing on the budget we discussed? Better than managing. I actually have money left over each month. She laughed at my expression. I know, shocking. Turns out when you're not trying to maintain an image that costs a fortune, you can live quite comfortably on a normal income. My phone buzzed with a text from the foundation's administrator. First scholarship recipients have been selected. All 5 students are enrolled for fall semester. I showed the message to Sophia. The foundation is working. Tell me about the recipients. I pulled up their applications on my phone. Single mother of 3, working toward her nursing degree. Former foster kid studying engineering. First-generation immigrant pursuing computer science. A young man who aged out of the system and wants to become a teacher. And a girl whose parents died in a car accident, leaving her to support her younger siblings while finishing her own education. They all sound like you, Sophia observed. That was the point. Our food arrived, and we ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. It was the first time I could remember being relaxed in Sophia's presence. Can I ask you something personal? She said eventually. Sure. Do you forgive us? Mom and me? For how we treated you? I considered the question carefully. I think forgiveness is more complicated than people make it sound. I'm not angry anymore, which is different than forgiveness, and I'm not punishing you, which is also different than forgiveness. Then what would forgiveness look like? Maybe this, I said, gesturing between us. Maybe forgiveness looks like building something better instead of staying stuck in what was wrong. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. David told me something interesting yesterday. He said the reason Mom chose Dad over him wasn't just money. What else? Security. Not just financial security, but emotional security. David said Mom was terrified of being vulnerable, of having to depend on someone who might leave her. Dad represented stability in a way that loving someone her own age couldn't guarantee. That doesn't excuse the lying. No, but it explains it. Fear makes people do awful things to feel safe. After dinner, Sophia insisted on paying the bill. It's the first time in my life I've paid for anything with money I actually earned, she said. I want to savor the moment. As we walked to our cars, she turned to me. Clara, I know I haven't earned the right to say this yet, but I'm proud to be your sister. Even if we don't share DNA, you're the best family I've ever had. For the first time since this whole situation began, I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Keep working, I told her. Ask me again in a year. Is that how long it takes to earn your trust? I don't know. Let's find out together. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing architectural plans for the Foundation's first community learning center. Mom's voice was shaky, older somehow. Clara, I need to tell you something. I should have told you months ago. What is it? David isn't Sophia's biological father either. The words hit like ice water. I set down my coffee cup carefully, buying time to process what she'd just said. Explain. I was seeing 3 different men during that time period. David, your father, and someone else. Someone I can't find now. I closed my eyes, feeling the careful structure I'd built around our family's new dynamic starting to crack. Who was the third man? A traveling businessman named Marcus Webb. I met him at a conference in Chicago. We had an affair that lasted about 6 months, right around the time Sophia was conceived. Mom, please tell me, you're not calling to say that Sophia might have a third potential father we know nothing about. Silence on the other end of the line. Mom? I'm calling to tell you that Marcus Webb contacted me last week. He saw the news coverage about our family's inheritance dispute in the Chicago Business Journal. He's hired a lawyer. The room seemed to tilt. What kind of lawyer? The kind that wants to establish paternity and claim Sophia's inheritance rights. I sat down heavily in Dad's desk chair. Did you tell Sophia? No, I wanted to talk to you first. And David? He doesn't know either. I stared out the window at the accounting firm's parking lot, watching normal people go about their normal lives while my family's complicated drama revealed yet another layer. Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm not going through another DNA circus. Whatever mess you created 23 years ago, you're going to fix it. Clara, I don't know how. Figure it out. You managed to manipulate 3 different men into believing they might be Sophia's father. You can damn well figure out how to resolve this without destroying everything we've built. After hanging up, I called Sophia immediately. She answered on the first ring. Hey, Clara, I was just about to call you. David and I have another case, and… Sophia, we need to meet. Right now, there's something you need to know. An hour later, Sophia sat across from me in the same coffee shop where she'd asked for a second chance. Her face had gone progressively paler as I explained Mom's latest revelation. So I might not be David's daughter either? That's what Mom is saying. Which means I might have spent 6 months building a relationship with another man who isn't my biological father? It's possible. Sophia stared at her untouched coffee for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were blazing with something I'd never seen there before. Pure fury. I'm done, she said quietly. Done with what? Done with Mom's lies. Done with living my life based on information she provides. Done with wondering who I really am because my mother is apparently incapable of telling the truth about anything. I leaned forward. What are you going to do? I'm going to take a comprehensive DNA test that compares my genetics to everyone possible. If this Marcus Webb wants to claim paternity, fine. If David is my father, great. If neither of them are, then at least I'll finally know the truth instead of living in whatever fantasy Mom has constructed. And if it turns out David isn't your biological father, Sophia's expression softened slightly, then I'll be grateful for 6 months of having a father figure who actually cared about getting to know me as a person. What about the inheritance implications? Clara, here's something I've learned from working with David. The truth is more valuable than money, even when the truth is complicated and painful. She stood up, gathering her keys and phone. I'm driving to Mom's house right now to demand every detail about every man she was involved with during that time period. No more lies, no more partial truths, no more protecting my feelings. Do you want me to come with you? No. This is something I need to do myself. After Sophia left, I sat in the coffee shop thinking about the strange journey our family had taken. 6 months ago, I'd been the outsider who never quite belonged. Now I was the only person whose parentage had never been in question, watching everyone else navigate the consequences of Mom's deceptions. My phone rang. Richard Morrison from the law firm. Clara, I've received a formal request from an attorney representing a Marcus Webb. He's demanding DNA testing to establish potential inheritance rights for Sophia Morrison. On what grounds? Possible paternity. If he can prove he's Sophia's biological father, his attorney argues that she should be entitled to inheritance rights based on Thomas Morrison raising her as his own daughter. The legal implications were starting to become clear. If Marcus Webb was Sophia's father, and if he could prove that Dad had acknowledged her as his daughter for 23 years, there might be grounds to challenge the inheritance distribution. Richard, what are the chances this claim has merit? Honestly, I don't know. Your father's will was very specific about biological children only, but 23 years of treating Sophia as his heir creates some interesting legal precedent. How long do we have before this becomes a formal challenge? Webb's attorney is requesting a meeting next week to discuss terms. I ended the call and stared at my phone, wondering if our family's drama would ever actually resolve, or if we were destined to discover new complications every time we thought we'd found solid ground. One thing was certain. Sophia was right. The truth was definitely more valuable than money, even when the truth threatened to cost us everything we'd worked to build. The meeting with Marcus Webb and his attorney took place in Richard Morrison's conference room on a Thursday afternoon that felt like a trial, even though no formal charges had been filed. Marcus Webb was everything I'd expected and nothing I'd prepared for. Mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He had Sophia's stubborn chin and her talent for commanding attention just by walking into a room. Sophia sat beside me, her face carefully composed, but her hands trembling slightly. David flanked her other side, and I was struck by how protective he'd become of a daughter who might not be his daughter after all. Mr. Webb, Richard began, perhaps you could explain your interest in this case. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes focused on Sophia. 23 years ago, I had a relationship with Elizabeth Morrison. When she told me she was pregnant, I offered to marry her and support both her and the child. What was her response? Richard asked. She said the baby wasn't mine, that she was involved with someone else who had better financial prospects. Marcus's jaw tightened. I believed her until I saw the news coverage of your inheritance dispute and realized the dates aligned perfectly with our relationship. Sophia spoke for the first time. Why didn't you try to contact me before this? Because your mother convinced me that I wasn't your father and that pursuing a relationship would disrupt your life. Marcus's expression softened when he looked at her. I've regretted believing her ever since. His attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Karen Phillips, opened a briefcase, and extracted several documents. We're prepared to offer a reasonable settlement that avoids litigation. What kind of settlement? I asked. Mr. Webb requests DNA testing to establish paternity. If he is indeed Sophia's biological father, we propose a 50-50 split of the inheritance between Sophia and Clara, recognizing that Thomas Morrison treated Sophia as his heir for 23 years. David leaned forward. And if the DNA shows I'm her father? Then Mr. Webb withdraws his claim entirely, Karen replied. Sophia looked around the table at these three adults who all had theories about her parentage. Has anyone considered asking what I want? The room went quiet. I want the truth, she continued. But I also want to point out that regardless of biology, I've spent the last 6 months building a real relationship with David, working in his business, and earning my own money for the first time in my life. She turned to Marcus. If you're my biological father, I'd like to get to know you. But I won't abandon the relationship I've built with David, and I won't automatically assume that DNA determines who gets to be my family. Marcus smiled, and the resemblance to Sophia was even more pronounced. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. What do you mean? I asked. I don't want money, Marcus said simply. I have plenty of money. What I want is the chance to know my daughter, if she is my daughter. Karen Phillips looked like she wanted to object, but Marcus continued. I'm withdrawing any inheritance claim. The money should go to whoever Thomas Morrison intended it for. I just want to know if I've been missing out on knowing my child for 23 years. The room's tension shifted from adversarial to almost hopeful. You're sure about this? Richard asked Marcus. Completely sure. I've spent 23 years wondering what if. I'd rather spend whatever time I have left building something real than fighting over money in a courtroom. Sophia looked at me. Clara, it's your decision. Will you agree to the DNA testing? I thought about everything that had brought us to this point. Dad's suspicions, Mom's lies, David's investigation, and now Marcus's unexpected generosity. Yes, I said, but I have conditions. Name them, Marcus said. First, regardless of what the DNA shows, David remains part of Sophia's life if that's what she wants. You don't get to replace the relationship they've built. Agreed. Second, if you are her biological father, we establish some kind of family relationship that includes everyone. No more secrets, no more half-truths, no more DNA surprises. Absolutely. I looked at Sophia. And third, whatever money you receive from the inheritance, you continue earning your place in this family through your own efforts. Biology might determine who you are, but character determines who you become. Sophia nodded. Deal. The DNA results came back 3 days later. Richard called us all back to the same conference room, and I couldn't help but think about how much had changed since that first reading 6 months earlier. Marcus Webb is definitively Sophia's biological father, Richard announced. 99.98% certainty. David spoke first. Congratulations. You have an amazing daughter. Thank you, Marcus replied. And thank you for taking care of her while I couldn't. Sophia looked around the table at her expanding family. So now I have 2 fathers and a sister who's not my sister but is the best family I've ever had. Actually, I said, about that inheritance split. Everyone looked at me. I've been thinking about this for 3 days and I've made a decision. Sophia, you'll receive half of the inheritance as Marcus's attorney originally proposed, but not because of any legal requirement. Then why? Because you've earned it. These past 6 months, you've become someone I'm proud to call family. Blood doesn't make you my sister, but choice does. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Clara, there's one condition. The money goes into a trust that funds your investigative business with David and Marcus. You'll have access to the income, but the principal stays protected to ensure you never forget the difference between earning something and being given something. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smiling. Your father would be proud of how you've handled this situation, Clara. Maybe, I said. But I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing this for the family we choose to become, instead of the family we accidentally were. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of the Morrison Family Foundation's first community center, watching Sophia give a presentation about missing persons investigations to a group of social work students. She'd grown into her role as David and Marcus's partner in ways that surprised everyone. The investigation firm now specialized in cases involving family reunification, and they'd successfully resolved 12 missing person cases in the past 6 months. Marcus turned out to be exactly the father Sophia had needed, steady, supportive, and genuinely interested in who she was, rather than who he wanted her to be. He and David had become unlikely friends, bonding over their shared experience of loving the same complicated woman from different periods of their lives. Proud of her? David asked. joining me at the back of the room. Incredibly, she's become someone I genuinely respect. What about your mother? Any progress there? I glanced at Mom, who sat in the front row taking notes on Sophia's presentation. The year of therapy had been transformative in ways I hadn't expected. She'd finally acknowledged the damage her deceptions had caused and was working to rebuild relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. She's trying, I said. That's more than I thought possible a year ago. The foundation had grown beyond my original vision. 5 scholarship recipients from the first year were thriving in their studies, and we'd expanded to fund a mentorship program connecting successful professionals with young people aging out of the foster system. Miss Morrison? A young woman approached me hesitantly. I'm Sarah Chen, one of this year's scholarship recipients. I wanted to thank you personally. Tell me about your studies, I said. Mechanical engineering, with a focus on sustainable design. I'm working on my senior project now, a water filtration system for communities without reliable infrastructure. That sounds like it could change lives. That's the goal. I grew up in a community where clean water wasn't guaranteed. I want to fix that for other kids. After Sarah walked away, David smiled. You realize what you've created, don't you? A scholarship program? A legacy. You took the worst thing that ever happened to your family and turned it into something that helps other families. As the presentation ended, Sophia approached us, glowing with the satisfaction of work well done. How did it go? I asked. 3 of the students want to volunteer with our missing persons database project, and 2 are interested in internships next summer. Marcus joined our small group, carrying coffee for everyone. It had become his habit to bring refreshments to family gatherings, as if making up for 23 years of missed opportunities. What's next for the firm? I asked. We've been asked to consult on a case involving international child trafficking, Sophia said. It's big, complicated, and could help save dozens of children. Are you ready for something that intense? Sophia looked around at her chosen family, David, Marcus, even Mom sitting proudly in the front row. I think I'm ready for anything now. As the crowd dispersed, I found myself alone with Mom for a few minutes. Clara, she said carefully, I know I'll never be able to undo the damage I caused, but I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. Thank you. You could have destroyed all of us with what you inherited. Instead, you built something beautiful. I studied this woman who'd shaped my childhood through her emotional absence and favoritism. Do you understand why I made the choices I did? Because you're a better person than I raised you to be, she said simply. You learned compassion and generosity despite my example, not because of it. Actually, I said, I think I learned both from your example. You taught me what it felt like to be overlooked and undervalued. That made me determined to never make anyone else feel that way. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, Clara. For all of it. I know. And I forgive you. You do? I do. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger is too expensive for the life I want to build. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought our family to this point. A year ago, I'd been the disappointment daughter who never quite measured up. Now I was surrounded by people who'd chosen to be family regardless of biology or legal obligation. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Thank you for giving me the chance to become someone worth knowing. I smiled and typed back, thank you for becoming her. The Morrison family story wasn't the one any of us had expected to live, but it was the one we'd chosen to create together. Sometimes the best families aren't the ones you're born into, but the ones you build from scratch using truth, forgiveness, and the radical decision to love people for who they choose to become. As I pulled into my driveway, the same house where I'd grown up feeling like a stranger, I realized I'd finally found my place in the world. Not because anyone had given it to me, but because I'd created it for myself and then shared it with people who deserved to be there. And that, I thought, was worth more than any inheritance money could buy. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more incredible true stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your place in the world. What would you have done in Clara's situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for taking this journey with our family.